My uncle, my dad's brother, had 3 ocean-going yachts out of West Palm Beach, Florida: Rowena, Moonmoth, and Hiawatha. I was born on board the Hiawatha. So was my cousin Robert, the man that owned the yachts. It was his son. He was born in July of 21. I was born in October. And shortly after I was born, my mother decided to leave my father. My dad was a lieutenant commander over at Pensacola, Florida, teaching pilots to fly. Well, he gave that up to take me and raise me. 1923, we left Florida and came up to Buffalo on one of the yachts. That was the Mariposa, not the Mariposa, I can't think of it right now. Rowena. Well, we came up, one of them, I can't remember the name, but we came up on the inner water route, and we were having trouble with the boilers. Now, I'm a baby. All of this has been foretold to me later on. Well, we arrived in Wilson Harbor. That's on Lake Ontario. Uncle Ken let everybody off the ship, even those that worked in the engine room. We weren't off that ship an hour and 20 minutes when it blew higher than a kite. And the money, the insurance, bought 2 more boats for my Uncle Ken. Well, we moved into a place called North Tonawanda, just outside of Buffalo. My dad met a young lady by the name of Henrietta, who I immediately took a dislike to. And we bought a beautiful home in Kenmore, New York. And my dad saw what was happening, and so did my grandmother. That was his mother. And she told her son, Ray, I'm going to take Stuart and raise him. So that was the agreement. And from the time I was 3 years old until I was 9, my grandmother raised me with a Bible and a hairbrush. And believe me, she used the hairbrush much more than the Bible. I was to be a born leader because I would get in more trouble than anybody I knew. Well, during the period of time that grandmother died, my dad came back down and got me and brought me up to Buffalo. And Congressman Biter, who was a friend of our family, told my dad, if Stuart will stay in school, keep his grades up, I'll appoint him to the academy. That was my goal. All through high school, a 90 and above average on the honor roll. Up till January 1939. I had a fight with my stepmother and almost killed her. I went to a total failure in 3 months. And I'll digress for a minute, because when I go out to the high schools, I tell the kids, you stay in school regardless of what happens. And then I tell them I violated my own principle. What happened was, in April of 1939, I told my dad, I've got to get out of the house. I don't want to be around her any longer. So he asked me, well, what do you want to do, son? I want to join the Navy. So he took me down to the recruiting office there in Buffalo, New York. I walked in, I said to the chief, you got a 20-year contract? He almost fell out of his chair. He says, you being a smart aleck. I said, no. I says, I read the brochure. You can do 20 years and retire. And that's what I'm going to do. He said, I've heard that before. Well, that's exactly what I did, 20 years and 9 days, and retired. Well, he told me, take your test. So I sat down and took the test, passed it with flying colors. Go get yourself a bite to eat, come back, and you'll get your physical. Well, I come back at 1 o'clock, walked into the doctor's office. He took one look at me. He said, son, we can't take you. You're too small. I was 4'11", weighed 112 pounds. And this here is a photograph that you can look at and pass around. Can you find me? I was the president of the camera club in Orchard Park High School. I asked the chief, is there somebody I can talk to? Well, he said, I'll let you talk to the commander. So I went ahead, and the commander asked me, what's your problem, son? I said, sir, I want to join the Navy, but I'm too small. He says, you're serious about the Navy? I said, yes, sir. He said, Roosevelt has started a new organization. It's called the CCCs. Any of you know what it is? Civilian Conservation Corps. Now, the commander told me, rightfully, you can't go because you're not on welfare or relief. Remember, this is the days of deep depression throughout our country. But he said, since you're interested in the Navy, I'm going to write a letter to whom it may concern that we're going to send you there to build you up physically, mentally, and spiritually. So off I went to Burdett, New York. That's a small town along the Finger Lake region, Lake Seneca. The day I got there, I stood alongside of my locker and put a pencil mark. In my mind, I'm going to put a pencil mark every 30 days till I'm 5'2" with eyes of blue, 122 pounds. Well, the next morning, right after breakfast, Hedley, grab an axe. You're going to chop down trees. Well, that's the photograph of me. And you look at it sharp, and you'll see I'm wearing a sailor hat. I'm going to be in the Navy whether they let me or not. So I did that for about 2.5 months, chopping down trees. That was the physical end. Well, Colonel Phillips called me into his office one day, and he said, Hedley, how would you like to be a surveyor? We see you have a good aptitude for mathematics. I says, you train me and I'll do it. So they did, and I finished out my career in the CCCs as a surveyor. That was the mental part. Well, I was in the coffee shop one night, and I met this blonde, Lois, and I asked, she was sitting by herself, and I asked her if I could sit with her. So she said, sure. And already in my mind, she's going to be my girlfriend. So we were talking and had a real nice chat and everything. And the third night that we were talking, she said, Stuart, would you go to church with me Sunday? Church? But I wanted to be with her, so I went. Well, that went for several months till September. And in September, when they had just come out with Cherry Coke. And we were each having a Cherry Coke. And she said, Stuart, would you go to church with me Wednesday night? Who goes to church? Yeah, I'll go. So I went that night. I didn't have any idea of paying any attention to anything. But when I walked in, I saw these newspaper articles all around the wall. This fellow is a former gangster of the Dutch Schultz mob of New York. He's the enforcer. And I'm wondering, what in the world is he going to talk about? Well, he started off telling us he had just got released a full pardon from Sing Sing. Tom Dewey, who was the district attorney, had put him in jail with the intentions of him staying there for 30 years. He was there for about 5 years when he got a full pardon. But it happened because he had a spiritual experience. And he promised the Lord that if he wanted him to stay in the prison, he wanted to be able to witness to the inmates. But if he saw fit to release him, he would go to the different states that he was known in and give his testimony. And he told us, he said, now don't get shocked when I tell you I have murdered 7 men by putting them in a cement bucket and dumping them in the Hudson River. Let me explain, he said. Al Capone's gang, Charlie Lucky Luciano's gang, the Palumbo gang, and the Purple gang from New York were all muscling in on his boss, the Schultz. He was the enforcer. He got rid of them. And he made mention, it was not for those crimes that I committed that I'll be kept out of heaven. And he took his arm and he said, the only thing that'll keep any of you out of heaven is if you don't believe Jesus Christ paid the penalty for your crime. I sat alongside of Lois. I stole, I lied, I cheated, I swore, I drank, and I knew they were all sins. I didn't even realize she was sitting next to me. I got up out of my seat. I came forward. He came up the platform. He said, what do you come forward for, son? I want to know that Christ just like you know him. So he led me to the Lord that night, September 15th, 1939. That was the changing of my life from that moment on. And when I tell you I went through Pearl Harbor, World War II, and the Korean War, and never got a scratch or a burn. And I saw men's bodies blown apart, burned beyond recognition, and literally limbs blown off. It's an awful shocker for a 20-year-old brat. But I ended up joining the Navy on August 20th, 1940. Up I went to Newport, Rhode Island for training. When I finished my training, I was, well, first of all, I'll tell you, you don't ever smart off to a chief. I did, and I paid the consequences. Pick up your rifle, put it up over your head, run 11 laps around the field. I collapsed, and I determined never to talk back to a chief again. However, when we were getting orders, my orders were to the USS West Virginia, anchored off Long Beach. Now, I didn't argue with the chief, but I did ask him. I said, Chief, why in the world do they send us all the way across the country when we're right here on the Atlantic coast? Why don't they just send us to the Atlantic Fleet. They'll save money. He said, you want to know the answer? I said, yes. That's so you can't go home every night. Well, that was a pretty good answer because 3,000 miles, I'm not going to hitchhike home. I went aboard the West Virginia on October 29th, 1940, my birthday. Now, don't laugh. I grew up around boats from the time I was 3 right till I was 9 years of age. Speedboats, rowboats, canoes, you name it. But my infatuation was steering wheels. And I got aboard that great big battleship, and I wanted to see the steering wheel. I wasn't dry behind the ears yet. I managed to get to the pilot house. The officer deck says, what's your name? I says, where's the steering wheel? He says, the what? I says, the steering wheel. He says, you're looking at it. And it was like a streetcar controller. Within 2 weeks, I'm going to be on it, and it's known as a helm. Well, he said, they've been calling your name for the last 5-10 minutes to fall into quarters. They want to assign you to a division. So I managed to get down there, and believe it or not, I acquired a new name. The chief said, Ham, where have you been? I says, I was looking for the steering wheel. That whole entire crowd bust out laughing. Ensign Harris, just out of the Naval Academy, was our senior division officer. And as he walked down the aisle, he assigned each one of us to our division. And I was assigned to the 3rd Division. And he said, Hedley, I want you to train as a gun pointer on Main Battery. Now, gun pointer is responsible for raising that gun up and down for the distance we're going to fire. And so I said, good, I'll do that. I was always ready to try anything new. And so we left Long Beach on January the 3rd, arrived in Hawaii on January the 8th. Now listen carefully. The chief got us all together and told us we're going to spend more time at sea than we are in port. He said, I'll explain that to you. Admiral Yarnell, Admiral Richardson drew up a policy that there was to be only one battle fleet in Pearl at a time. Now, we had 3 battle fleets out of Pearl. Roosevelt moved them all out there. We adhered to that policy up until Thursday before the attack. On November 26th, orders came out of our White House to Admiral Kimmel and General Short, prepare for sabotage. That meant bring in everything as close as you can get it. 187 airplanes were out on the landing field that morning, rather than being in hangars. When the Zeros went in, they couldn't miss. 5 airfields that we had. Now, I'm going to count them, or call them up, and you count them. USS Nevada, USS Arizona, USS West Virginia, USS Tennessee, USS Oklahoma, USS Maryland, USS California, USS Pennsylvania, USS Utah. How many battleships? 9 battleships were important. Now, the Utah had been converted from a battleship to a target ship. The guns had been removed and planking had been put over the top of the deck for our planes to drop sand bombs on them. From the air, it would look like an aircraft carrier. October 11th, 1941, Japan dropped off their top spy. He knew every ship, where they were going to be, and he had the USS Enterprise tied up where the Utah was. The Enterprise was coming back from Wake Island with 4 destroyers and hit a storm. They had to fuel those 4 destroyers, so they were 1 day late getting back. When the Japanese torpedo plane sighted the Utah, they thought they had the Enterprise. And what an expression that was to Admiral Yamamoto when he found there were no aircraft carriers in Pearl. Now, I'm going to digress for a minute, and I'm going to ask a question. How many of you like to sit in a chair and lean back on the back 2 legs? I'm 9 years old. My dad was a lieutenant commander. Yes, sir, and no, sir, were spoken in our home. My dad only spoke twice. Third time he acted. I was in the kitchen leaning back. My dad says, Stuart, they made 4 legs on a chair to sit on the floor. Yes, sir. How quick a 9-year-old forgets. So next time I'm leaning back, my dad said, Stuart, I'll not tell you again. Yes, sir. In this ear and out that ear. Next time I'm leaning back, he kicked the back leg out from underneath me. I cracked my head on the floor. I said, there's got to be a better way. Now I sit with my feet up under the chair. That's at 9 years of age. I'm now 20 years. Just turned 20. And what I called myself was a 20-year-old brat that grew up overnight. Now, my battle station, as I told you, was gun pointer. Did not have any back. This is all brass. And it's about this high up. And normally, as a gun pointer, my feet will be on a platform. That allows me to bend over and crank in the dials. I've got 2 dials. One is from fire control. They're the ones that are setting the height of that gun for the distance they want to fire the shell. Now, first of all, that shell stands 5'2". It weighs 2,700 pounds. It's 16 inches in diameter. In order to fire that shell, you've got to have 5 100-pound bags of black powder. We're not going to fire any 16-inch guns in Pearl. We'll blow Pearl Harbor off the map. And people ask me, are you joking? No, I'm not. Because we broke windows on Ocean Boulevard when we were almost 200 miles off the coast. That's the concussion. Now, that was the Tennessee, the Maryland, the Colorado, and West Virginia all firing at the same time. Well, I sort of jumped ahead of myself. On the morning of December the 7th, I was getting ready to go ashore and meet my girlfriend and her mother. I had a girl in every port. No, Juanita was a sweetheart. And I met her roller skating. And we were going to go on a picnic up on the north end of the island. I got up at 5 o'clock that morning, showered, shaved, got my clothes all ready, and I was shining my white shoe skates, putting batteries under because I had port and starboard running lights on my skates. And I looked down and my dress shoes were missing. So I asked one of the fellows, we have about 38 men in the division. And I asked one of them, I said, did you see my shoes, my dress shoes? Oh yeah, Pete Hartley wore them last night. Pete Hartley's a first-class boatswain mate with 32 years in the Navy. You don't question what he does. In reality, he was my sea pappy. He's the one that taught me all my knots, how to repair an anchor chain and all that stuff. So I said, where is he? He's down in after steering. So I got to go down 5 decks to go all the way to the stern of the ship. And there he is, sound asleep, drunk. So I took my shoes off from him, and as I'm walking out, the quartermaster's compartment is right there. And Cherry, a third-class quartermaster, said, Stu, how about having a cup of coffee? Coffee aboard the Navy ship is prime, number 1. So I said, sure. So we're sitting there, and it's now about 5 minutes to 8. And all over our loudspeaker came, away, fire, and rescue party. Well, Ensign Lombardi, who had the quarterdeck, saw a fire over on Ford Island, not realizing we were under attack because the Tennessee was inboard of us, and it obstructed the view. Well, I made a beeline to get to my locker to get my hat and fall into quarters. When I opened up my locker to get my hat, first-class boatman Hicks kicked me right in the seat of the pants. Get to your battle station on the double. This is the real thing. That's quite a shocker for a 20-year-old brat. But I grabbed my hat, I ran out on top side. Planes were diving from every direction. And I saw our pilot, Lieutenant Commander White, underneath a gun tub. They like going underneath one of these tables. And he's firing away with his .45. I'm a seaman, and I'm not going to question, but I'm wondering what kind of war is this? So he said, where's your battle station, son? And I pointed up to turret 3. Get up there as fast as you can. I was going up the ladder, port ladder, and here come a Japanese torpedo plane down our port side. I could see the pilot, the co-pilot, radarman laughing like everything. And those 50 caliber wing guns were spitting bullets everywhere. So I got inside the turret. Now you're up on the gun deck, but you got to go onto the primer deck and then down into the pit where my battle station is. And right alongside of me, I got an elevating screw. But we've got 2 16-inch guns separated by 4 inches of steel. Right down by my foot is a hatch, just big enough for a man to crawl through. We called them manhole covers. And it's locked down with 4 steel dogs. We got into our position. There were only 2 of us that manned the right gun. The left gun had 11 men. Normally, we have 12 on each side. Crosland was the trainer. His job is to move the gun out away from the ship. We're still not going to move that turret. All of a sudden, we hear machine gun bullets hitting the turret. We fit the felt the thud of a torpedo, ship lurched, and Crosland said, "Stu, let's see what's going on." And we took the sight cap off the periscope. Bam! There went the Arizona. This is one of 32 men that I saw blown off that ship. I met him in 1984 when I joined this organization. Jack McCarran, 62% of his body was burned from the burning oil in the harbor. Now, you have to picture this because that's the starboard side. This is the port side. He was the gun captain of the 5-inch guns on the starboard side. His entire gun crew was blown into the air and into the harbor. Now, I thought a bomb went down the stack because it looked like the ship broke in half. But I later learned that an armor-piercing shell went right through the forecastle on the starboard side, right into number 1 handling room. Each one of the handling rooms had 1,000 bags of black powder. That blew. That set off turret 2. 1,177 men died instantly. There's a story that goes with that. Saturday night, over at Bach Recreation Center, they had the Battle of the Bands. Arizona won everything there was. However, my vice president danced with a 10-year-old girl, and he took the crown for the jitterbug test. Amazing. Well, about 3 to 5 minutes later, there's an explosion in our turret. And with that explosion, it blew that hatch right over those 4 steel dogs. If my feet had been out where they should have been, I would have no legs, and I probably wouldn't be alive. That explosion blew that hatch off, tore my foot pedal off, went under the elevating screw, tore Crosland's foot pedals off, and landed against the barbette, picking both of us simultaneously and throwing us 8 feet back into the elevating screw. When we picked ourselves up off the deck, Crosland said, "Stu, let's get out of here." Well, he didn't say it quite that nice. So we made a beeline to go up the primer ladder to get out of the turret. I got to the top of the deck of the primer deck, and I still had the JA phones on. And I had reached the end of the cord. And in my excitement, I grabbed a hold of the belt, snapped it in half, and threw it down in the pit. I spent 20 years trying to stretch one of those belts. And I often wondered, how did I ever break that? And when I asked the kids in the high school, some of them know. But I didn't know till I was 37 years old, and I was reading the Inquirer. And it said, a mom picked a 1.5-ton car up off her son. I said, that's impossible. I read the article, then I understood. Do you know what it is? It's adrenaline that flows through your body. Well, we got on topside, and Ensign Sears was screaming for us to get over on the Tennessee. Our ship was on about a 15, 20-degree lift. The water, when I was on the quarterdeck, was just below my kneecaps. And while we were standing there, my commanding officer, Captain Benyon, came out of his battle station, which is the conning tower, that's 6 inches of steel all the way around. He came out, went over on the starboard side of the flying bridge. One of those armor-piercing shells hit the edge of turret 2 on the Tennessee, and a piece of that shrapnel flew up and tore his stomach completely out. How he got back to the port side is a miracle. How many of you have seen the movie Pearl Harbor? Well, 85 of us were guests of Michael Bay at Rosarita Beach in the filming of that movie. We got to meet all the characters. And the one I wanted to meet was Bubba, who played the part of Dory Miller. Now, I'm ashamed to say this, and I'm ashamed to say it around our military, but at this time, if you were black or Hispanic, you could not serve as a boatswain mate, a machinist mate, a gunner's mate, torpedo's mate, a boilerman, pharmacist mate. You served as a mess cook, a mess attendant, or an orderly. And Dory Miller was Captain Benyon's orderly. He was on the flying bridge with the skipper. The last words that the captain said, "Abandon ship. She's no longer any good to us." Dory did not realize the seriousness of his wound. He was going to try and get him down to sick bay, but he died in his arms. Dory was so mad, he grabbed a machine gun and started shooting at planes. Now, when you saw the movie, you see Dory Miller with a twin-barrel .50 caliber magazine in the center. We did not have a machine gun like that at that time. Also, when you see the Oklahoma upside down, you see 2 giant screws sticking out of the water. We did not have any 4-screw battleships at that time. What they used was the Titanic as an example of the Oklahoma upside down. Michael Bay was the one that invited us down there. And when we stepped off the bus, he handed us a script of the entire film. I went over and I started reading, and I got Ralph Lindenmeyer, who was our go-between, and told him, "You tell Michael Bay we don't want that language in that movie." 98% of the language was removed. Well, getting back to Pearl, while we were standing there, Krause and I watched the Oklahoma capsize. Fellas were jumping off, diving off, sliding off, and the ship went upside down and buried in the mud. However, we called it the Whale because the whole bottom section was above the water. A buddy of mine, Max Bauer, who was on board the Vestal, he was a chief metalsmith. He grabbed 4 men, took an acetylene torch, and went over and started to cut a hole in the bottom of the hull, not realizing that the heat from that torch was going to unite with the gas and oil fumes below. 5 men were asphyxiated. They did not make any more attempt until Monday. And on Monday, Bob Haney from Shop 6 came over with a chipping hammer and 3 men. He walked up and down the hull This gentleman right here, Jim Bounds, was trapped upside down, water right up to his neck, and he was pounding away with a wrench on the bottom of the hull. When Bob Haney heard the clang, and he told him, cut a hole right there. And they got 27 men out of 36 hours. They were trapped inside that ship. To date, I have probably had over 250 funerals. I was selected as a chaplain back in 1984. And I just had my first funeral for the year of 2017 last Friday. Cecil Jacob, who was on board the Tennessee. Now, the shrapnel that killed my captain also wounded my vice president. He was in the lookout tower on the Tennessee, and a piece of that shrapnel came up through the deck and into the and tore his leg wide open. So he got the Purple Heart, and he's going to be reelected as my vice president again for next year. While we were watching the Oklahoma go over, Ensign Sears is screaming for us to get over on the Tennessee. And the 5 young fellows that were jimmying across the line got machine gunned. And I told Crosland, we're not going over any lines. Well, how are we going to get over there, Stu? I don't know, but we'll find a way. While we watched the Oklahoma tip upside down, I noticed our 5-inch 38 anti-aircraft guns that stuck out over the side of the ship. And I said, Crosland, did you ever run down a railroad track? He said, what are you talking about? Did you ever walk on a railroad? I might have when I was a kid. I said, you're going to do it today. He said, what are you talking about? I said, you see that gun barrel? It's about that big around. I said, we're going to go up in the Marine casemate on the starboard side, climb up on that gun, run across the gun barrel, jump down on the Tennessee. You go first. I did. Where do you think this idiot was going when he hit the deck of the Tennessee? I'm on the 3rd rung of the ladder to turret 3 when a Marine lifted me off with his foot. Haven't you had enough of those turrets? I says, what do you want us to do? Get over on the beach. I says, how? Swim, you idiot. Fire was twice as high as your building. That was the oil that was all collected between the shoreline and the ships. From the Arizona, from the West Virginia, from the Oklahoma, from the California, it ringed it, and it was ablaze. So we went over on the starboard side of the Tennessee, all these nice, neat, clean piles of shoes and clothes. I told Crosland, we'll strip down to our undershorts and jump, don't dive. Because if there's any debris in that water, we don't want to hit our head. So over we went. Now, I qualified as an ABC swimmer in Newport, Rhode Island in training, not an underwater swimmer. But I guarantee you I swam underwater that morning. And I broke surface twice before I got to the beach. The beach would probably be about as far away as that wall back there, that red wall. I broke surface twice. I thrashed like mad to get the oil and water and fire away, the hottest air I ever breathed in my life. When we got to the beach, an ambulance picked us up and took us to the dispensary. Now I'm going to digress because I was speaking to 85 admirals and generals that are all top surgeons in the Navy at UCSD. the gal that invited me to come and speak said, Stuart, I want you to tell them what your medical supplies were on December 7th. I said, you mean that, Kathy? Yes. I said, okay. So when I got to this point, when we came into the dispensary, it's all open up like a big patio. There's a great big red cross painted on the deck that can be seen from the air. You got to go up the stairs, we call the ladder, and up onto the upper deck, and they had cots, beds, anything they could put a body on. And I imagine we had well over 175 bodies that were in that area at that time. They examined us to see if we had any burns, any lacerations, any wounds of any kind. And if we didn't, they put us to work immediately with those that were burned beyond recognition. Well, they gave us a tube of ungentine ointment. That's to put on the burns. They gave us a jar of sulfa drug that you put into the wounds. Then they gave us canisters of morphine, which we ministered to those in dire pain and dying. 3 items, and they saved lives. When I saw what those 85 surgeons had up on the screen, equipment out in Iraq, I was amazed at the medical supplies they had. Well, while we were ministering to these fellows, it's now about 9:25. The second wave is coming in. And I looked up and I saw 2 planes approaching Fort Island, and I yelled, duck! And we went under the cots, the beds, the chairs, right flat on the deck. And it's all windows. They just shattered. They fired their machine guns right through the windows. One of the planes, when it lifted up, dropped a bomb right in the center of the dispensary. When we got a chance, after it cleared, the dust had cleared away and everything, we looked over the banister. You couldn't see a speck of red. At about 10:15, they said, Hedley, Crosland, and several others, they need you back aboard ship to help fight fire. Now I'm going to test you. When I went back to the West Virginia, I was assigned to our executive officer, a fellow by the name of Richard Helen Cotter. And he had the nozzle, I had the hose, 500-pound pressure hose. And when he opened the hatch to the 3rd Division compartment, boom, boom! And I thought the Japanese were back. But it wasn't. The heat was so intense in that compartment that the minute he cracked that hatch and the air burst in, it blew out our portholes. Took 45 minutes to cool that compartment down. And that was from a armor-piercing shell that did not explode. Also, digressing a minute, that armor-piercing shell that hit our turret was dropped from a high-level bomber. And on top of the left gun is a catapult. I called it a slingshot. We would fire our planes at 120 miles an hour off that catapult. This morning, there are 2 planes on that catapult. One is our scout observation. It's a biplane. The top wing is the gas tank. The other plane was the admiral's plane, known as a Kingfish. It's a single-wing plane. That shell hit the top wing of the observation plane. That gas exploded, burnt the plane to a crisp, split the catapult, throwing the admiral's plane over on the quarterdeck. And when I came out of the turret, it was burning at the time. And it came down through 5 inches of steel. Now, our turrets have 8 inches steel on the side plates. The faceplate is 16 inches of steel, and the top is 5 inches of steel. Also, to protect the ship from after steering to the anchor windlass room is what is called an armor belt. And it's equivalent to the size guns that you have. Ours is 16 inches solid steel before you get to the boiler room or the engine room. Now, 1972, I met the man that led that attack on Pearl Harbor, Commander Fushida. I met him at Hoover High School when I was working with Youth for Christ. And Fushida had had a spiritual experience, 32 years as a Buddhist when he became a Christian. And in the process of talking with him, I learned that he had used armor-piercing shells instead of bombs because they had to get through 5 steel decks to get to our handling rooms. Also, knowing that the depth of the water in Pearl Harbor is about 35, 40 feet deep. That's shallow. A torpedo dropped from a plane goes about 50 feet under, comes up and into its target. So Fushida redesigned the torpedo by taking the elevator and the rudder off, which are steel, and put wooden ones on. But in order to get through that 16-inch armor belt, he put a double warhead on the torpedo, stretching it out, making it like a lance. When those torpedoes came through the harbor, they were just about 15, 20 feet underwater. You could see them coming. I didn't see him coming, but my buddy did. He was in a 50-foot motor launch coming alongside. And that's quite a story. Johnny Anderson was one of my best buddies. We roller skated together, we dated together. That morning, he was in a 50-foot motor launch coming alongside the gangway when he saw the 3 torpedo wakes coming. He pulled his boat up alongside the armor belt, jumped up on it, stuck his head and shoulders through a porthole. When that torpedo hit the ship, the force of the water drove him right on through. He ended up against the bulkhead. He got up, ran topside, dove over, and swam ashore. Well, he was supposed to be in turret 3 in that left gun. And the Navy did not know that. Now, on December 9th, they gave us a postcard. I am well. And you signed it. And that's all. And it went home. Well, the Navy had already notified Johnny's mother that he had been killed in action because they figured everybody was wiped out in that left gun. Now I want to show you a picture of that so you can get an idea of what it was like. And the reason I'm alive that armor-piercing shell did not explode. But that's the results inside turret 3. 11 men were burned beyond recognition. How come? When that shell penetrated the overhead of the turret, on top of our guns is a cylinder that's just about the length of this table and that other table, filled with glycerin. And the purpose is that when we fire that gun, we want it to come right back to ready load. It's a dampening element. That shell split that casing. Now the fire from the airplane, the gasoline, came right down into the turret. That set off that glycerin. That was the explosion that blew a hatch right off. Well, I didn't know Johnny was on the other side, but I knew that that was his battle station. The telegram from the Navy Department went to his home in Kansas, little town outside Kansas City, that he had been killed in action. They were having a memorial service in a little church there that morning that card arrived at the post office. Small town, everybody knew everybody. The postman locked up the post office, ran down to the church, ran down the aisle, handed the card to Mrs. Anderson. She read that card, had a heart attack, and died. Johnny shared that with me with tears in his eyes. Johnny later went aboard to San Francisco with me, and I'll tell you, the most horrible experience of World War II happened on the night of November the 12th, 1942, at Guadalcanal. Johnny was a gun pointer on a 5-inch 25 caliber. He was a gun pointer. In that night battle, we got hit with 27 14-inch shells on a cruiser. 7 of them went through the pilot house, killing the admiral, the captain, the executive officer, the navigator, the gun boss, chief quartermaster, the helmsman, and a third-class quartermaster were killed on the bridge. I didn't know it, but the next morning on the 13th, Dr. Monis grabbed me. He said, "Hedley, would you help identify bodies?" I said, "Sure." We have a dog tag, 2 dog tags around our neck. And so what I would do, I came up to gun 7 first, and there were 5 dead bodies, and I opened up their mouth, took their dog tag, put it in, shut their mouth, and put a red tag on them. That's so they could identify that body when they collected them. I come up to gun 5. Johnny's body is blown in half. His legs, torso is dangling right where he had been sitting. His head and shoulders were over underneath the vent. I started laughing. Dr. Monis doubled up his fist and smashed me in the jaw as hard as he could. He said, "Hedley, you have every right to report me. An officer has no authority to strike an enlisted man. But if I hadn't have done it, you would have gone stark raving mad." Snapped me out of it, and I continued to identify bodies we had 236 men killed in 45 minutes aboard that cruiser. We had 4 Medal of Honors awarded aboard that ship. 2 of them posthumously and 2 of them alive. That was the hardest part of World War II for me, to lose my best friend. And I went on from World War II to later end up in the Korean War. We only had one excursion. I was on the USS Dashiell destroyer, and we pulled into Pusan Harbor. And our orders were that our squadron was to go up to Wonsan Harbor and destroy everything in it. That meant we were to fire all 5 of our torpedoes. Well, when we were entering the harbor, there's a big hill on both sides, and the communists were shooting at us with rifles. We fired a 5-inch shell, and there was no more shooting. We went on in, and as we made our curved turn, we launched all 5 of our torpedoes and then headed out. And before we got out, we could hear the explosions, one right after another. Then right after we came out, the Dorch went in. Right after the Dorch came out, the Gatling went in. And then when the Gatling came out, the Caperton went in. 4 destroyers. And then, when I was 6 years old, I was sharing this with optimists. I spoke to about 100 optimists downtown, and I asked them, how many of you are really optimists? I says, let me tell you what an optimist is. When I was 6 years old, I was sitting on my girlfriend's doorstep. And I said, Margaret, what do you want to be when you grow up? She says, I never thought about it. You? I says, yeah. What? I want to join the Navy, I want to go around the world, and I want to marry you. Well, I joined the Navy, and in 1953, I went around the world. But I did not marry her. I married a beautiful young lady that worked for the FBI. We were married for 64 years when the Lord called her home. We had 64 wonderful years. How many of you are married that are in here? Great. I'm going to put you to a test. Our 25th anniversary. Our children are old enough to take care of themselves. I said, sweetheart, let's have a honeymoon. Celebrate our 25th anniversary, 1974. So she said, well, what do you want to do? I said, would you like to go to Hawaii? She said, I'd love it. So I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take $2,500 out of our savings, $100 for each year that we've been married. Great. So I went downtown to the Thomas Cook tour agency, and I asked them, I said, what will it cost me to take my wife on a honeymoon for our 25th anniversary to Hawaii? I said, I've got $2,500 to work with. She says, well, let me figure it out. Came back, $1,965. That's a 17-day tour of Kauai, Oahu, Maui, Molokai, and Hawaii. First-class hotels. I was beyond myself when I came home and told Wanda, we're going to Hawaii. She said, well, what's it going to cost, Butch? I said, $1,965. What are we going to do with the rest of the money? I said, we'll split it. You take half and I'll take half. That'll be our spending money. On our anniversary, June 18, 1974, I said, sweetheart, I've got a brilliant idea. What's that, Butch? How about if we save our money for 5 years, and every 5 years we go on a new honeymoon? And that's what we did right up until our 65th. And we have traveled the world. And each time we went, we took $3,000, $3,500, $4,000, and we came back with money to put back into the savings account for the next tour. Wanda and I had a wonderful, wonderful life. We had 5 lovely children, 1 boy and 4 girls, twins. And amazing thing, I never told my wife about Pearl Harbor. But when we were there on our 25th anniversary, we took the tour boat into Pearl. And when we entered Pearl, everything was normal. We went around the north side of Fort Island, where the Utah and the Raleigh and Detroit, no problem. The minute we came around on Battleship Rope, I saw the planes diving, and I was ducking, and Wanda said, Butch, what's wrong with you? I said, honey, I never told you this, but I was here on December 7th, 1941, and as we came around that point, I saw everything being replayed right before my eyes. You know, I've been to Hawaii, I would say well over 25, 30 times since. I've never had that experience again. You have any questions? Oh, yes. I was going to put you to a test. I named the name Richard Helen Cotter. Does that name register with anybody in this room? Out of thousands of people that I've asked that question, I've only had 1 young lieutenant off the USS Kidd that knew the answer. And you know, what it reveals is we don't know what's going on in our country. Richard Helen Cotter was the first director of the CIA. 1946, when I went to Washington, D.C. for 6 years shore duty, I was introduced to my executive officer in an unusual way. I was called to Washington because of the fact I did not have a home that I could go to, that they could put me in an area near my home. So they brought me to Washington, D.C. One of the men on the San Francisco, who was a lieutenant commander, Shonlin, who is now a 3-star admiral, brought me to Washington. He is one of the Medal of Honor recipients of the night of November the 12th and 13th. He was alive. The other was Bruce McCandless, whose father was a skipper of 32nd Street before the war. When I was introduced to Schonlin as a 3-star admiral, he told me, he says, "Stu, there's somebody here you haven't seen since December 7th. I says, "Who's that?" "I'm not going to tell you. I'll give you the address. On B Street. At the end of B Street is the Armory." So I drove down B Street, and when I was coming back up, I saw this little white sign over this brown clapboard shingled house, Central Intelligence Agency. I wondered, what in the world is that? So I got out of the car. I'm in my blues. I got all my ribbons. My hat is squared. And I walked up, and the Marine said, "State your business." I said, "I don't know what my business is." "I was sent here by Admiral Schonlin. Let's see your ID card." So I broke out and gave it to him. He gave it to another Marine that had a machine gun. And I'm wondering, what am I getting into? So about 5-10 minutes, the Marine came back, "Follow me." We went through a maze of screens. We came into the outer office. The wave is sitting there. "The Admiral will see you in just a minute." Admiral, another Admiral. And out that door walked Richard Hellencotter, my former executive officer. So he took me into his office, and I said, I called him Commander because that's what he was on the West Virginia. And I said, "Commander, what is this Central Intelligence?" He says, "Stuart, all during the war, the FBI handled intelligence gathering, national and international. Congress figured it was too big of a load for the FBI, so they split it. They started a new organization, the CIA, which handles all intelligence gathering overseas, while the FBI does all the gathering of intelligence within the United States." Well, that made sense, but he wanted to know where I went when I left the West Virginia and where my career took me and such. And he told me the same thing that Schonlin told me. "Stuart, keep your nose clean, do your job, we'll keep you here as long as we can." I stayed 6 years on shore duty. However, I forfeited making chief because they wouldn't let me make chief while I was on shore duty. But as soon as I got aboard the Dash Shield, I went to Great Lakes to Class B electrical school, took the test for chief, and in 1954, May, I was rated Chief Petty Officer. Now, my heart's desire from 1940 was to end my career here in San Diego. I was walking down Rosecrans Boulevard. I had hitchhiked down here because we were supposed to move here in 1936. My dad helped design the PBY in Buffalo, New York, with Reuben Fleet. Well, Reuben Fleet came out here for a vacation, met with Vultee, and said that they would converge and it would be consolidated Vultee. When Reuben got back to Buffalo, he told my dad, he said, "Ray, we're moving the entire plant to San Diego. We will pay the expense for all the moving of your household. We will have a home for you to move into before you get there. My dad was on cloud 9 when he walked in the kitchen. Now, Henrietta, he called her Peg. He says, Peg, we're going to move to San Diego. She said, Ray, I'm not moving anywhere. My dad's chin hit the floor. But he told Reuben, I'm not going to cause any problem. Henrietta's mother was 93 years old, and she wasn't in good health. And her thought was, I'll get out there and I'll have to come right back. So we didn't go. My dad, Reuben got my dad a good job with I.E. DuPont. Well, when I joined the Navy, 1940, all my buddies wanted me to go to Hollywood, Los Angeles, Oxnard. I said, nope. What do you mean, nope? I says, I'm going to hitchhike down to San Diego and see what that place looks like. We were supposed to move there in 1936. I hitchhiked down to San Diego. Don't laugh. I got on the bus and I said, will you take me to La Jolla? He said, son, it's La Jolla. And if you're going out east, it's not El Cajon, it's El Cajon. So I got an education. Well, I ended up, they lived over on Narragansett in La Jolla. And Reuben was surprised when he saw me. And his kids had grown up too, which I had grown up with. And so then I walked all around the receiving station. Boy, it was beautiful, clean, neat. And as I was walking down Rosecrans Boulevard, I said, Lord, if I ever retire, I would love to retire here in San Diego. 1955, my orders. Report to Norfolk, Virginia for instructor training duty upon successful completion. 4 years shore duty as an instructor at Motion Picture Operations School, San Diego, California. Wanda and I bought a home here in 1958, and I'm still living in that home. And we raised our 5 children there. We raised our grandchildren there. And when Wanda passed away, I purposed in my heart that I wasn't going to sit around and grieve. I was going to pour my life into other people. I think I've spoken to a little over 4,000 some odd people this year. I just got back from London on board the Queen Mary II, where 2 of us Pearl Harbor survivors had 45 minutes to speak to over 1,000 people in the Illumination Theater. And then we spoke to about 658 in a Royal Theater. And now I haven't danced in many, many years, but the fellow's wife that took us on this cruise said, Stuart, you're going to dance. I says, I don't know how to. She says, I don't either, but we're going to dance. We had a great time. And blessing upon blessing has come upon me since Mama Wanda passed away. 2015, I was chosen as the award for the American Patriotic Award aboard the Midway. And I just was on board the August 31st, where they honored 4 of their docents who had been former pilots during the Vietnam War. All 4 of them had been shot down. All 4 of them were held captive for 7 years. And they all survived. And they're all docents on the Midway now. On New Year's Day, you make New Year's resolutions. 3 years ago, I chose I'm going to visit every one of my Pearl Harbor survivors in their homes. I've gone as far as San Clemente to visit Pearl Harbor survivors. I've gone all the way down to the border. Now this year, I added something, and that is early in the morning of their birthday, I call them up and sing happy birthday to them. And you know, I've got about 72 widows. They're spouses of Pearl Harbor survivors. And I called one the other day, and she said, you know, you are the first person that has contacted me since Bill passed away. That should never be.